Welcome to This Explainer. If you've been watching the news over the last couple of years, you've probably reached a very logical conclusion. The nature of war has fundamentally changed. Well, today we're going to unpack a groundbreaking December 2024 analysis that asks a vital and, honestly, kind of terrifying question. Are we learning the completely wrong lessons from the Russo-Ukrainian War? So let's just dive right into the big question here. Did Ukraine actually revolutionize modern warfare? I mean, the widespread public belief is for sure that affordable commercial drones, satellite internet, and cyber warfare just completely tore up and rewrote the entire military playbook. We look at the footage and naturally assume the old ways of fighting are totally dead. But when analysts looked really closely at the actual doctrines of global powers, they found something pretty shocking. Section 1. Confirmation, not revolution. We all kind of expected a massive doctrinal overhaul, right? But the reality? It's really just a confirmation of existing strategies with some marginal adjustments here and there. Think about it. China, Taiwan, and the US didn't suddenly do a massive U-turn after watching Ukraine. Instead, the conflict basically just validated the paths they were already on. China's informationized warfare, the US strategy of distributed operations, and Taiwan's asymmetric defense strategy, those were all pre-existing concepts. The war didn't teach them a brand new way to fight, it just confirmed that they were right all along. Moving on to Section 2, War's New and Old Traits. Okay, so this is absolutely crucial. The big takeaway is this organizing concept, war with new and old characteristics. Future conflicts aren't just going to be some sterile, high-tech video game. They are going to seamlessly and terrifyingly combine futuristic, cutting-edge tech, like drone swarms and cognitive cyber warfare, with brutally old-fashioned realities. We're talking about grinding urban combat, massive industrial munitions production, and muddy World War II-style trench stalemates. What you should really take away from this is that high-tech doesn't replace the brutality of attrition. It just adds a whole new layer to it. All right, Section 3, why Taiwan isn't Ukraine. It's honestly incredibly dangerous to just copy-paste the Ukraine model onto a potential Taiwan conflict. Just look at the variables. First up, geography. Ukraine has a massive land corridor for NATO resupply, but Taiwan is an island. Second is the nuclear balance. Russia holds a massive asymmetric advantage over European conventional forces, whereas China is just now nearing nuclear parity perception with the US. And finally, the opening move. We're looking at a ground invasion versus a highly likely naval blockade. A blockade would completely gut the indirect proxy model the US used to ship arms in Europe. Long story short, the variables simply do not transfer. Section 4, the stability-instability paradox. I know, it sounds super academic, right? But the real-world impact here is immense. This is the concept where a nuclear shield actually enables conventional aggression, kept just below the threshold of all-out war, simply by deterring adversaries from stepping in directly. Russia used this nuclear shield masterfully to keep NATO boots off the ground. But the analysis points out a huge catch here. China hasn't reached true parity with the US yet, even with the projected 1,000-plus warheads by 2030. And because Washington has massive alliance credibility costs in the Pacific, with Japan and South Korea watching very closely, it's way less likely the US would just stand down for Taiwan. So that shield, it might not work the exact same way in Asia. Next up, Section 5, the cognitive battlefield. So if nukes create a stalemate and blockades cut off weapons, where does the real fight happen? Ultimately, the single most decisive battleground might literally be the cognitive domain and societal will. The analysis warns that China is playing a really long psychological game. Through continuous information operations and the deliberate normalization of military drills constantly circling Taiwan, their goal is to desensitize the public. They want to dull the vigilance of the Taiwanese people. In this scenario, the human mind and the collective willpower of an entire society is the ultimate target. That's arguably way more important than any physical hardware. Section 6, the Asian theater adjustments. Okay, so we said earlier that China hasn't tossed out its core informationized warfare doctrine, but they are aggressively patching up their vulnerabilities. Their marginal adjustments include revising their nuclear doctrine, addressing their own weaknesses in the cognitive domain, totally reorganizing how they handle space and information, and rapidly accelerating their anti-drone systems. So they aren't throwing away the blueprint at all, they are just heavily reinforcing the walls. Meanwhile, in a direct, very tangible adjustment inspired by the war in Europe, Taiwan took a hard look at its own readiness and realized it had a severe gap. So they made a massive shift. They extended their mandatory military conscription from a mere 4 months to 1 full year, starting in January 2024. That's a huge deal. It really shows how their pre-existing concerns about force readiness were completely validated by the sheer manpower demands we're seeing in modern combat. And finally, Section 7, Strategic Lessons for India. India actually faces very similar asymmetric threats and gray zone pressure from China along the line of actual control, or the LAC. The strategic lessons here are incredibly clear and methodical. Step 1, India's military planners shouldn't just blindly import drone-centric tactics. They need to audit their own cold start and mountain warfare doctrines to see exactly what holds up. Step 2, they need to closely track the PLA's technological adjustments, like those counter-UAV systems that are happening right on their own doorstep. And Step 3, India should lean heavily into Taiwan's asymmetric resilience model. That means prioritizing mobile, indigenous systems over trying to match China heavy platform for heavy platform. And this actually brings up a huge domestic parallel. Just as Taiwan realized that short 4-month training cycles completely failed the reality test of modern war, India is facing its own internal debates regarding its new short-term military recruitment program, the Agniveer scheme. India absolutely has to rigorously benchmark the scheme against these exact same readiness metrics, because if short cycles don't build adequate combat depth for Taiwan, it definitely requires a hard, independent assessment to ensure it actually works for India's defense needs. You can't ignore logistics either. They're literally the backbone of this entire survival strategy. Because a two-front blockade-style crisis would absolutely shatter wartime resupply lines, India has to change how it prepares right now. First, they have to prioritize peacetime indigenous stockpiling. That means expanding the Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative in defense. Second, to actually survive precision missile strikes, India must disperse its bases by expanding airstrip readiness across regions like the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And third, military diplomacy can't just be an occasional photo op. It has to be a sustained, continuous effort to keep those international partnerships active. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with Taiwan's incredibly sobering defense motto, whatever we have, we fight with. This entire doctrine of asymmetric survival wasn't magically created by the conflict in Europe, it was validated by it. It's a really harsh reminder that in the crucial opening days of a conflict, just waiting around for outside help isn't a strategy. You have to fight with what is already in your hands. Which leaves us with one final and pretty provocative question. If the true battlefield of the future isn't just in the muddy trenches or up in the skies, but rather in the cognitive domain, what happens to the people? Will populations in Taiwan or India, or really anywhere facing prolonged gray zone coercion, recognize the threat in time? Or will they slowly succumb, allowing the completely abnormal to simply become the new normal? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the lessons we think we've learned.